Vayehi ki zaken Yitzhak. It came to be that Isaac became elderly. Vatichena enav meraot. It was difficult for him to see. Blindness was only part of the problem. See, he is a major character for us, a patriarch, and yet largely a silent character in the Torah, which explains somewhat why he didn't resist when his father went to sacrifice him. He also lived with his mother in his mother's tent as an adult, and his wife was chosen for him. February is Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month, a unified effort amongst worldwide Jewish organizations to foster inclusion of all people, people specifically with disabilities, and all of us who love them. The Torah is replete with imperfect characters, just as all of us are imperfect. How does the way that Isaac was cared for by his family and his community challenge and inspire us to do likewise? Some of us here at Micah face significant challenges, are hindered by impairments, internal and external, developmentally, socially, behaviorally. Many of these differences are actually quite charming. Some not so much. The thing about Micah is we accept everybody. Quirky doesn't bother us because we lead with welcoming the strange, and they in turn teach us how to be compassionate. The Tao does not speak. The Tao does not blame. The Tao does not take sides. The Tao has no expectations. The Tao demands nothing of others. The Tao is not Jewish. On Purim, we send Mishloach Manot, gifts to our friends and the poor, available for purchase and picked up at our Carnival, Micah Land, the second happiest place on earth.
Shabbat, Shabbat, Shalom. להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני, טוב, טוב, טוב להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך העליון, לשמך העליון, ולזמר, ולזמר לשמך העליון, טוב, טוב, טוב להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני, טוב, טוב, טוב להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני, להגיד בבוקר חסדך ואמונתך בלילות, בלילות, טוב, טוב, טוב להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני, טוב, טוב, טוב להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני, ולזמר לשמך העליון, לשמך העליון, ולזמר, ולזמר לשמך העליון, טוב, טוב, טוב להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני, טוב, טוב, טוב להודות, טוב להודות לאדוני.
Shabbat, Shabbat, Shalom. Tov lehodot. It is indeed good, and I'm feeling thankful. My name is, as always, Philip Rice, Rabbi Flip, as they call me. We welcome you in virtually to Congregation Micah. We have on our bima, thank God, Miss Lisa Silver, our musical director, and Jerry is over here accompanying. Rabbi Lori sits on our bima as well. And tonight has a new name, courtesy of the National Council for Jewish Women. It's called Repro Shabbat, not retro Shabbat. We're not like pulling out all sorts of classical reform Jewish music right now. No, it's called repro, like in reproduction, as in an opportunity for congregations, organizations, communities like ours to celebrate the critical importance of reproductive health, reproductive rights, and reproductive justice, and to learn more about Judaism's approaches to these issues. Part of Micah's beauty is its role in our lives and the way it makes our tradition, an ancient one, come to life with modern values. On this Shabbat Mishpatim, as it is traditionally called, Shabbat, the Sabbath of laws, I invite you to reprocure yourself and your soul, to reproduce peace together as we reproclaim our commitment to education and advocacy and service, and to creating a more whole world, bringing order to chaos and light to darkness, just as God did at the very beginning, and as we do here at the beginning of our service with the lighting of our Shabbat candles.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahalik ner shel Shabbat. Praised are you, Adonai, our God, creator of the universe.
We continue welcoming in this Shabbat, this day of rest, by welcoming in the Sabbath angels with Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem,
Shalom Aleichem,
Malachei Hasharet,
Malachei Hasharet,
Malachei Yom, Melech,
Melech,
Malachei Hamachim,
Malachei Hamachim,
Kadosh
HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Praise be to you, O ministering angels, messengers of the Most High. Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessing. Hakuni l'shalom,
Malachei Hashalom,
Malachei Hashalom,
Malachei Yom, Melech,
Melech,
Malachei Hamachim,
Malachei Hamachim,
Kadosh Baruch
HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Enter in peace, O messengers of peace, angels of the Most High. Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessing.
Hakuni l'shalom,
Hakuni l'shalom,
Malachei Hashalom,
Malachei Hashalom,
Malachei Yom, Melech,
Melech,
Malachei Hamachim,
Malachei Hamachim,
Kadosh Baruch
HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Bless me with peace, O messengers of peace, angels of the Most High. Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessing.
Seichem l'shalom,
Seichem l'shalom,
Malachei Hashalom,
Malachei Hashalom,
Malachei Yom, Melech,
Melech,
Malachei Hamachim,
Malachei Hamachim,
Kadosh Baruch
HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Depart in peace, O messengers of peace, angels of the Most High. Majesty of majesties, Holy One of blessing. Shalom Aleichem,
Shalom Aleichem,
Malachei Hasharet,
Malachei Hasharet,
Malachei Yom, Melech,
Melech,
Malachei Hamachim,
Malachei Hamachim,
Kadosh Baruch
HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Yikra v'yikadash shmei Rabbah, ve'yamadi v'rach yerutei, ve'yamlich malchutei, ve'chayechon v'yomechon, u'chaydecho be'Yisrael, v'agalu b'zman kariv, ve'yimeru amen, v'hei shmei Rabbah mevorach, ve'olam olam me'omaya, Yitbarach, Yishabach, V'yipa'ar, V'yitramah, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, V'yitaleh, V'yitala, Shemei Kedusha B'rihu, Le'ela min kol birchata, V'shirata, Tushbechata, V'nechemata, Ta'amiram B'yama, V'yimeru, Amen.
Having marked the holy moment with the words of Hatzi Kaddish, we now invite you, if you are able and willing, to rise for the call to worship.
Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya
et Adonai HaMevorach
We thank Shabbat Shaban for the words of Ahavat Olam.
Oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Ahavat olam beit Yisrael, Amcha ahavta, Amcha ahavta. Torah u'mitzvot, Elohim u'mishpatim, Otanu lamadta, Otanu lamadta. Akein Adonai Eloheinu shapenu kumeinu, nasir b'chukecha, v'nizmach b'divrei Toratecha, u'mitzvotecha le'olam ha'ed. Ki ein chayenu, v'yorech yameinu, u'bahem nagem v'layla nagem, yomam v'layla. Ba'avatcha al tasir, imeinu le'olamim. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kavod, Shem Kavod, Malchuto Leolam, Leolam Vaed. And you shall love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And all these words which I command you on this day shall be in your heart, shall be in your heart. And you shall teach them diligently unto your children. You will speak of them when you're sitting in your house, when you're walking by the way, and when you're lying down, and when you're rising up shall bind them for a sign upon your hand. They will be for frontlets between your eyes, and you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates, and upon your gates, that you may remember and do all of my commandments, and be holy unto your God, unto your God, unto your God.
The decision to have a baby or an abortion is a deeply personal, private one, best left to women, her family, and her doctor. It's one of the most common medical procedures performed today, and it's incredibly safe. Laws that make it difficult, if not impossible, for a woman to get an abortion if she needs one, particularly if she is poor, are increasing at an alarming rate. Protecting access to affordable contraception, protecting a woman's ability to make a personal, private decision, fighting for pregnancy rights, against discrimination. These all serve to remind us that religious liberty is an important value, one our people dreamed of in ancient Egypt. Along the way, we witnessed miracles, always reminding us that freedom doesn't include the right to deny someone else rights or health care or any of the services they need. We sing now the Mi Chamocha in celebration of religious liberty and also as a prayer for our country and our tradition, past, present, and future.
1, 2, 3. La 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh,
So on that journey, after we crossed the sea, we reached the other side, but the story, of course, continued. And it was a vulnerable time, just like we all feel vulnerable in the world today. And so we always take a moment in our service to ask for God's protection, that we might be sheltered beneath those wings.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu l'shalom, l'shalom. V'hamidenu malkeinu l'chaim. Ufros aleinu sukkot shlomecha, ufros aleinu sukkot shlomecha.
Shelter us beneath thy wings, O Adonai. Guard us from all harmful things, O Adonai. Keep us safe throughout the night, till we wake with morning's light. Teach us, God, wrong from right. Amen. 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 Shamru v'nei Yisrael et HaShabbat, et HaShabbat. Lasot et HaShabbat l'dorotam, berit olam, berit olam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, odhi leolam. Beini uvein bnei Yisrael, odhi leolam. Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat, Shabbat, vayinafash.
So I thought I would share a little story. I was very lucky when I was in rabbinic school. I had many great teachers. A great deal of them were women. Dr. Tamara Ashkenazi was my Torah, my Bible scholar teacher, and Dr. Rachel Adler was my Talmud teacher, and she wrote this fascinating book, and in it she tells this fascinating story. Put a pin in that. A few years after studying in Los Angeles with these women, I was lucky enough to win a trip to Israel. Why? Because Israel Bonds was trying to groom young people to be interested in Israel Bonds, so they took a rabbinic student from each of the seminaries, from Hebrew Union College and from Jewish Theological Seminary and from Yeshiva University, Orthodox Seminary, and I actually roomed with the Orthodox gentlemen. And so we had some fascinating conversations, and one night we were talking, and I had to share this story from Dr. Rachel Adler. I was explaining about why we add the imahot, why we say the women's names. It's different. In addition to Elohei Avraham, we say Elohei Sarah, right? Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah. Well, he had heard that, we had done that, and he assumed we're egalitarian. It would make sense that we would include the women in our prayers. And I said, oh, Dr. Adler taught me a totally different reason for why we include them. And he said, what's that? And I said, well, there was a gentleman who was praying that his wife might become pregnant. And all the time he was praying, he realized he wasn't praying to the God of Abraham. He was praying to the God of Sarah. That in reality, the fertility piece made him realize that praying to the God of Sarah gave him a fuller picture of what God was. And this friend of mine now from Yeshiva University had to think for a minute. He thought. And he said, don't you think the men of the Great Assembly who made the prayer book would have thought of that? And I said, but they didn't. So we include the women, and we invite you, if you are able and want to please rise for our central prayer tefillah.
Adonai tzifatai tiftach ufi yagi tehilatecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu v'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, v'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, v'Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon, Gomel Chasadim Tovim, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואמהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה, מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה, אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר, מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומידו מלך, מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, נאמן אתה להחיות הכל, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיה הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
We offer, as always, a little bit of silence, and after a few moments, Miss Lisa will take us out with some beautiful music.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Lolam Ki Atahu Melech Adon L'chol HaShalom Ki Atahu Melech Adon L'chol HaShalom Shalom, shalom, shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Olam V'tov b'necha Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Lolam Tasim Leolam.
We turn our thoughts to those in our community who are in need of healing on this Shabbat. I mentioned the names Sonia Marco, Steve Geringer, Violet Colton, Michelle Giffen, Savannah Morris, Jane Sherberg, Ron Galbraith, Paul Richter, Kenny Rogers, Debbie Rogers, Lee Cohen, Marcy Seligstein, Rudy Saperstein, Ronald Swanson, George Kamitz, Anita Hicks, Gail Hooper, and Andrew Holmes. Of course, if I've not mentioned a name you'd like to include in our prayer for healing, I invite you to say it aloud at home at this time, and we'll join together in a prayer for healing, for renewed strength, and renewed comfort. Our Torah portion begins with a very bold declaration this week. It says, "Now these are the mishpatim, the judgments, the laws, the rules that you, Moses, shall set before them." And immediately we are all ears, because this is just the question that we want answered. For millennia, human beings have been asking, how are we to act in this world? What laws should we follow? And more importantly, why? Which really matter and which are secondary? What does it mean to be a good person? Now, American law would have us understand our place in the world based on what we are entitled to. What are our rights? Asks American law. Jewish law does not outline our rights, but rather outlines our obligations and duties. In the words of John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. A pretty Jewish declaration by a Catholic president. Consider a law from Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, the Code of Jewish Law. You must give charity to the poor. You must give at least 1/10 of your income, but may not give more than 1/5. When you give charity to the poor, the dignity of the poor must be respected. You may not humiliate the recipient of charity. Anonymous giving, where neither donor nor recipient are aware of one another's identity, is, in fact, best. Even better is to provide employment or business opportunity, thus alleviating the need for further assistance. Notice how this is phrased. It doesn't say the poor have a right to receive charity. This isn't an entitlement program. It says you have an obligation. It's a mitzvah, a commandment. And this is the core concept of Jewish law. You are obligated because you are covenanted. This law speaks not to the lowest in us, but to the highest. You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. The purpose of law in the Torah is to cultivate the holy, the compassionate, the just, the sensitive within us, to cultivate the God within us. Law is educative, except we don't really learn how to behave in the world so much from law, but rather from story. What do I mean? Well, in Hebrew, the book of the Bible in which our Torah portion is found this week is called Shemot, names, to reflect the first significant word in the entire book. In English, however, we use the Greek name Exodus, departure. Thus, the central laws and judgments that are required of the Jewish people are presented in a biblical book called Laws, but rather they appear as an integral part of the story about the departure from Egypt. So you would think the book in which we find all of our laws, or many of them, would be entitled Mishpatim, or Laws. But in fact, the title of the book is about the central story itself. And context in this case is everything. These laws are not abstract ideas of a God who is above the fray or something a philosopher came up with on a cool afternoon in her study. Rather, they are concepts that are intimately tied to the experience of escaping Egyptian slavery. Now, in case that point is lost upon us, the Torah makes it explicit, not once, but twice. According to Rabbi Eliezer the Great, 36 times the Torah says something even similar to these two verses. The first is, you should not wrong a stranger, nor should you oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. Sounds familiar, right? The second is, you should not oppress a stranger, for you understand the heart of a stranger. What an idea. People often remark about the unusual quality of the Jewish story. It seems odd for a people to so emphasize and recall a humiliating past. Having been a slave is not something one would want to remember or even remind others of. But in the Torah, the opposite is the case. The Jewish people are reminded over and over that they come from less than noble origins, and it is precisely this experience of slavery that forms the core from which moral obligations to other people are derived. It is the most natural thing in the world to protect one's own family and clan, and to be concerned with or even frightened by the stranger and difference. It is precisely for this reason that the Torah has to reach us so many times and to teach us to act counterintuitively against our own immediate interests and inclinations. And the reason it gives for why we must do this is startling. You think the stranger is different from you, but you are wrong. The stranger is you. By virtue of being a member of the Jewish people, you were not only at Sinai, but you were also in Egypt. You remember the lashes of the slave drivers' whips as you lugged giant stones. You know what it feels like to be oppressed, and therefore, you must not oppress a stranger. However powerful, however secure you may be, indeed, because you have been oppressed, you may be more tempted to lord it over someone else when you finally have the power. And this is exactly, precisely what is forbidden. This very simple commandment against harming a stranger has a variety of implications, from the political to the interpersonal, because it speaks to issues and questions around immigration policy or inclusion of the handicapped and the treatment of those who are not Jewish in our own Micah community. The command to welcome the stranger can be understood to include openness to people or ideas, even experiences that seem strange and therefore threatening. When we cannot muster true hospitality towards the strangeness in our lives, at least we should try to manage with grace. The connection between rules and the experiences from which they derive poses an important issue: how a story spawns obligations. Ultimately, this portion of the Torah commands us to live in a certain way because we are part of the Jewish story. And it also commands us to ask ourselves some probing questions about our own lives, like, what has my story been, and what are the obligations that derive from that story? What does it matter that these rules for a good life come from a story about our ancestors in Egypt? Well, the rabbis distinguish between mishpatim and hukim, these two kinds of laws that we get in our Torah portion. For the rabbis, hukim are rules that have no rational explanation. I call those the because I said so rules, right? If you're a parent, you know the because I said so rules. And frankly, if you've been a child, which we all have, you still know the because I said so rules. You've heard them before. Mishpatim are rules with a reason. And the reason is not a principle, but a story. It is in this way that the portion is, in fact, our Torah this week, incredibly feminist. Carol Gilligan, who is a feminist psychologist, she spent many years listening to people talk about their moral life and how they went about making decisions. She was operating with a model that suggested that there were stages of development of moral reasoning, each more sophisticated than the one before, which could explain the differences in the ways that people approached moral choices. To her, it seemed that many of these differences could in fact be traced to gender. So often, although by no means always, there were characteristic ways of thinking about moral dilemmas that were shared by men and other ways that were shared by women. The differences themselves, Gilligan believed, were not hardwired into the brain by genetics, the Y chromosome or the X. The difference most likely derives from women's experience of the world, just as the Jews' commitment to the stranger and all that entailed derived from their experience of slavery. At the time in which the women in Gilligan's studies grew up, women's lives in American society had been defined primarily by relationships and by caretaking, while men had been encouraged to define themselves by individuation and achievement, becoming your own man. Gilligan noticed two different kinds of ethics that emerged: an ethics of rights, often found in men's reasoning, and an ethic of care that was often associated with women. Now, these moral ideologies are not really ideologies at all, so much as results of different life stories and different life experiences. And the idea that we find in our Torah this Shabbat, the connection between our slavery and our calling in this world, has penetrated really every corner of the globe through its adoption by Christianity and Islam, each in their own characteristic way. And the experiences that have typified and even defined women's lives in the past, being a daughter, a sister, a wife, a mother, sometimes an enabler, a caretaker, a nurturer, retain profound value. Even if Jews were to know no oppression anywhere on earth, they would and should be indelibly shaped by their story. So too, even if all women were to expand into the many roles available for all human beings, it would still be of value to recall their special stories and experiences and to honor the voice or command that may derive from them. The task before each of us is to look at our own stories and notice the ways in which we have already been obligated by what we have experienced. Maybe you've known a great teacher who has shaped your life, and now you feel called to teach in some way. Or maybe as a child you experienced illness or trauma, and now that experience has transformed into a deep commitment to visit the sick, or to be a chaplain, or a nurse, or a physician. Many of the things that happen to us in our life are not options, but we do get to choose whether we want to remember them. Ask yourself what your own stories have been. Which ones have you chosen to remember? And which ones have you chosen to forget? And how do you live differently because of those stories? When I was a rabbinic intern in New York, there was a mentally ill, homeless Jewish woman named Anna who would come to our Saturday morning services at the congregation where I served, and she regularly wandered in, and she would sit in the back row with her shopping bags, and she would mutter to herself. She smelled bad. She was occasionally disruptive, and she did make me nervous. I expected we would find a way to get her to leave. She was the quintessential stranger. But somehow, we knew that this was not merely a case of compassion or imagining that one day we might be in her shoes. Really, we had in fact been in her shoes. We knew the heart of the stranger. She was there to test us, to mock our pious pronouncements if we could not welcome her, and to force us to grow into the people that we claimed we already were. In this unprecedented, open society in which we live, we actually get to choose the greater stories with which we want to identify. We do not have to see ourselves as former slaves, but by becoming active members of the Jewish people, we may so choose to do so. If we are women, we may choose to embrace some of the traditional dimensions of women's roles, such as nurturing and connecting and the vision and voice that derive from those. The stories we choose to make our own become the stuff of our experience, along with the particulars of our lives. And in this way, through fate, through our own active will, we select our memories, we define ourselves, and then we discover what it is we are obligated to do. Shabbat Shalom. I invite you to rise if you'd like for the words of Aleinu.
Aleinu l'shabech l'adon hakol, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
The news of the virus continues, and we continue to see death. And even if that death begins to drop off, we know that there are many who still suffer, and we suffer ourselves too in our losses. We continue in this community to mourn for the passings of Rich Michelle and Henry E. Foyer and Dr. Bob Sirkin, Aidan Becker, Robert Golden, and Des Zamek, Elaine Farinacci, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Charlene Creeley, John Giffen, Faye Sirkin, Joyce Murray, Richard I. Bourne, Fran Schmerling, and Peggy J. West. We also recall on the anniversaries of their deaths Gail Jacoby Anderman, Estelle Anteville, Barbara Black, Sylvia Mykoff Goldstein, Helen Hetty, Seymour Ikowitz, Sophie Kitty Jacoby, Michelle Pollack, H. Michael Schreibman, Philip Starr, Bobby Weinstein, Catherine Whiteside. If there's names I've neglected, I invite you to say them at this time and to join me, if you like, in the words of Kaddish Yatom, the Warner's Kaddish. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divrach yirutei v'yamlik malchutei, v'chayakon uv'yomachon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, v'agalav izman kariv v'imru, Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya, yitbarak v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shmei d'kudisha brichu, le'ela min kol birkata v'shirata tush bechata v'nechmata, Damiran be'alma v'imru, Amen. Yehei shlomo Rabbah min shemaya v'chaim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, huya aseh shalom, aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru, Amen. We ask always that their memories continue to live on as a blessing. Okay, I'm going to start the announcements this way. This week on Zoom, okay? We have Torah study with me tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. You can go right to the website for all of this and get the links. I don't play favorites, but I tend to really like the people who come wanting to learn and arrive at our sort of safe space on Zoom for sort of deep conversations as we search for wisdom together and sometimes even find it. Okay. Also in the morning at 9:30 a.m., if I have the time right, Miss Lisa. Correct. There's a free concert. What would you choose? Micah Minis, a family-friendly experience full of music and dancing, and Miss Lisa is joined by our education director, Julie Greenberg. Schmooze and Views takes place Thursdays at 10:30. You can join me, Dr. Bob Smith, an array of politically correct and some not so politically correct opinions. Everybody gets a chance to talk. Next Friday, a women's circle gathers at noon under the tutelage of Rabbi Lori. And this month, we are acknowledging Jewish disability advocacy and inclusion. We're pointing people to Federation's website so they can fill out the survey. And if you go to our website, you can learn more about what to do to advocate on behalf of disabled people. Our next blood drive is scheduled for February 21st. I just signed up. I haven't been out of the country in a long time, so I think they're going to take my blood this time. And, we have a few more slots. I'm sure you can get that from our website. Virtual Mahjong now available online, occurring bi-weekly. We still have Tai Chi for you. It's available daily live and recorded. It's yoga without having to get on the floor. And then last announcements. Give me a second. We have finally arrived at the actual season of masks. Can anyone hear me? Okay, Mandalorian, this is the way. Not just of the Mandalorian, but with anyone with an imagination. Because there are several ways to connect for Purim, which is happening. In fact, Adar has just started. And our tradition commands us in the Hebrew month of Adar, to act more joyous, to feel more celebratory and happy. So, what makes people really happy? Getting gifts. And you can purchase some mishloach manot. One of the mitzvot, one of the commandments around Purim, is to buy gifts for others. You can do that up until Monday. If you go to our website there, you can learn more about how to support our religious school and all that is going on. We have activities all through Purim, including our culmination Sunday Carnival. It's an in-person event. You're not allowed to leave your car. You can drive through Micah Land. It's the second happiest place on earth. That's what I got. I think we should conclude with a kiddush and a final song that I think will come to you by way of, let me know? Shabbat Shabbat.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshenu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu v'shabbat kodsho b'ahava uvratzon hinchilanu zikaron l'maaseh v'reishit כי הוא יום תחילה למקראי קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים. כי באנו בחרת, ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ושבת קודשך באהבה וברצון הנחלתנו. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh hashabbat.
L'chaim. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
1, 2, 3. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah.